Hey, everybody.
Hi.
Hi. I am working on Josh's computer, which means that we might have some hiccups, and I beg your understanding in advance. Um, for those of you who were baking along with us the other night, how were the macarons?
I was exhausted just watching the girls.
That's awesome. Um, that's very funny. And Rebecca, yours were good. They looked beautiful. And I liked that you put them on like a little teacup also. Yeah. So before we get started, I'll tell you that the teacup, that the little saucer came from a collection that I used to look at as a little girl, all jumbled up, piled up in the break front in my grandparents' house. And I was a little girl, I used to look at it, and my grandmother would say, when you grow up and have a house of your own, those teacups are yours. And so then I grew up and got married, but we had this tiny little apartment in Manhattan, and I really didn't want that stuff there. So we waited until actually after she passed away, and now they're in my house and some of my treasures. So, okay. I'm glad to see all of you, and I'm excited to get to teach this particular class. So today we're actually going to be studying a couple of things that are connected that you might not know are connected. So one of those things is Birkat HaMazon, which is Psalm 126, and it goes like this, right? Shir HaMalot, and here's the important part. B'shuv Adonai et shivat Zionayinu kechomim. Right, that line actually is in the Agadah that we're going to be studying today. The second thing that you might already be familiar with is the character of Choni the circle drawer. Can I get snaps if you guys have heard of Choni the circle drawer? Okay, so, or a thumbs up, that works too. So Choni the circle drawer in what we're not going to be studying today, but is a different text. Choni intervenes in a drought that's happening, and Choni draws a big circle. No one else can make it rain. Everyone's tried, and Choni draws a big circle on the ground, stands in the circle, and says, "God, make it rain." And God makes it rain, but like either the rain was too much or too little, and he kind of talks to God about like what would the right amount of rain be, and is successful. And so Choni is thought of as this like particular dumpling of God who is able to for some reason have like this beautiful connection. So he's known as Choni the righteous. Yes, Lena.
Corey requests your speaker mode.
Oh, speaker mode? Okay. Hold on. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, that's just fine. Wait. Do you have her right there?
She texted.
Is it spotlight video or pin video?
I'm gonna think
Spotlight.
Spotlight. I'm guessing.
Okay, hold on.
Oh, or speaker. That was
No.
No.
Oh.
Ooh.
No, that's
No.
Rebecca.
Stops everybody else from interrupting if they.
Yeah. Okay, hold on. This will
Maybe
just take me a second. Oh.
Our family's not the best with like
Wait, where am I?
technology, so
Oh,
we
here am I.
apologize. Yes.
We're not bad. Okay.
Spotlight video.
Spotlight video?
Yes. There you
How's
go.
that?
Yay. Okay. Have fun.
Okay, awesome. So we have this character of Choni, who is this righteous person who's able to talk to God in a special way. And so he's known as Choni the righteous. And we're going to read a story in which he tries to understand that verse from Psalms. And we will get to that in English in just a minute. So I think I only have the, hold on one second. Oh, okay. Just one sec. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully this will work. Woo, okay, let's see. I can't see you. Okay, I can hear you though. So just know that I can't see you. So this is a story that the author, Jonathan Rubinstein, terms the surreal sleeper. And so it's kind of like the rabbi's version of Rip Van Winkle. And the front end of the story is very sweet and wonderful, and then things get very dark. So we're going to look at both of them. Ooh, okay. Rabbi Yochanan is our storyteller, and so he frames it this way. All his life, that righteous man, meaning Honi the circle jar, was troubled by the scripture, meaning the verse, when the Lord restored those who returned to Zion, we were like dreamers. So when the Lord restored, Beshuv Adonai, et Shivat Zion, those who returned to Zion, Hayinu kecholmim, we were like dreamers. He said to himself, and we'll go through it once without a lot of explanation, and then we'll go back. He said to himself, how could they be in a dream for 70 years? Okay, so now we're still with Honi. One day, Honi was walking along his way when he saw a certain man planting a carob tree. He said to him, now a carob tree does not bear fruit for 70 years. Are you sure that you will live 70 years and will eat from it? He said to him, I found the world with carob trees. Just as my ancestors planted for me, so I plant for my offspring. So that's sort of like part one of the sweet part. He, Honi, sat down to eat his meal. Sleep came upon him. While he slept, a mound of earth encircled him, and he was concealed from sight. He slept for 70 years. When he awoke, he saw a man gathering carobs from that carob tree. He said to him, do you know who planted that carob tree? He said to him, my father's father. Honi said to himself, certainly 70 years passed in a dream. He went to his house, meaning Honi went to his old house. He said to them, the people in the house, does the son of Honi the circle drawer yet live? They said to him, he is no more, but his grandson lives. He said to them, I am he. They did not believe him. He went to the study house. He heard the sages saying, our traditions are as clear today as in the years of Honi the circle drawer. For when he entered the study house, he solved every difficulty of the sages. Honi said to them, I am he. They did not believe him, and they did not treat him with the honor that he deserved. He prayed, oh, hold on. He prayed for mercy and his soul departed. So he died. Rava said, thus people say, either fellowship or death, which is very sad. Okay, so there we have the story in a whole bunch of parts. Oh, you know what? I was gonna share my screen and then I didn't. So all of that for naught. Okay, so I'm actually gonna put not the broken down story. Here, share the screen. Oh. Okay. Did you guys see the slides the first time or no?
No.
No. Oh, man.
No.
Okay. All right. So this story is in a number of parts. So who agree? I agree personally with Dr. Rubenstein that, in fact, this is a really trippy story, right? Like, this is not a straight up parable with just one lesson. And he points out, he's a scholar of Talmudic narratives and Agadah, and he says that this story is somewhat unusual in that it starts with trying to understand this verse, Shir Hamalot. There are very, very few Talmudic stories that position the sage as someone who doesn't understand a particular verse and is trying to understand it. So that's a little odd. Oh, here we go. Yes, I can enlarge the text a little bit. Nope, wrong. Too big. Okay. All right, there we go. So let's go through the events and then we can go back. So we're going to focus right now on the first half of the story. So Rabbi Yochanan is the storyteller, and he's telling a story about this particular sage that we were talking about before. And when it says he was troubled by the scripture, when the Lord restored those who returned to Zion, we were like dreamers. He's trying to understand, well, what is this verse about? Supposedly, he's trying to understand it. And he said to himself, how could they be in a dream for 70 years? Now, can anyone out there explain what that verse has to do with 70 years? No. Okay.
70 years?
Yeah.
Isn't that the length of the exile?
Correct. So it's the length of the first exile. So in 586 BCE, the Babylonians took over Eretz Yisrael and basically kicked out a lot of the Jews. And they are exiled in Babylonia for 70 years until the Persians took over and said, come on back, guys. It's okay. You can do your thing. And so some of the people then went back. This psalm particularly, it's part of the group of psalms that start Shir Hamalot. And the Talmud envisions that when people came back from Babylonia, that they were singing these very like exultant psalms about returning to Israel. So that's the 70 years. I find Coney's question really weird. Can anyone expand on that? Why is it a really weird question?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, why is, so Coney hears this verse, he knows of this verse. You guys can see the slides this time, yes? Okay. And I apologize for the rude formatting. So he knows about this verse, this famous verse.
Don't let it distract you.
Sorry. Okay. He knows about this verse, and yet he seems to not understand it, and he seems to connect it to like this very literal Shivat Zion. And he knows from history that they were exiled for 70 years. So what's the disconnect here? He said, when the Lord restored those who returned to Zion, we were like dreamers. Now, if you asked a question about that, what question might you ask?
Who are the we
Yep,
being referred to?
great. Who are the we? What else? You can even write in the chat if you don't want to speak.
Oh,
It says like dreamers, and he's interpreting it literally like a real dream.
Right. Right. It's like a super weird question because what is it like if I were going to ask a question, first of all, like Joan said, right, you would want to know what is the history, like who is talking, who's being returned, and then you would kind of want to know, well, that's interesting. We were like dreamers. So like what is that all about?
Like when you're in a dream, you're sort of like disconnected from reality. So you feel like they were like in a subconscious reality, or they felt like that the reality that they were living wasn't the real reality.
Right. It kind of has this feeling of like, I can hardly believe it. Right.
Huh.
So they don't mean it, they don't mean this literally, right? We were like
It's
dreamers.
a metaphor.
It's a metaphor, exactly. And so Choni supposedly says, I know this verse, it says they're like dreamers. And
It's a
it must be that those people, it was like they were dreaming for 70 years. So he's taking it literally, which is really weird. But that's the premise of this story, or at least the literary premise of it. So, and all right, so then what happened? So here's the bulk of the story. So, and I will try to enlarge this also. I don't know why it's not. Okay. So Choni is walking along and he sees a guy planting, a carob tree. And he says to himself, again, in like this very strange, like very narrow view of things that you wouldn't expect from someone of his status as a teacher. He says, hi guy, like, hello, Mr. Goldberg. Why are you planting this carob tree? Because how can you be sure that you'll even see its fruit? At which point the guy says to him, sometimes we do things for the future, right? He says, I found the world with carob trees, just as my ancestors planted for me, so I plant for my offspring. So Coney's saying, why would you ever do something for someone later, which is a really strange thing, but okay. And then this guy says, I don't expect to see the fruit, right? When we take care of the earth and when we plant things, we do it with an eye to the future. People planted for me, so I had carobs, and now I plant for my children. What types of things do we today, could we today, if you were going to say, I found the world with blank, just as my ancestors provided blank, so I provide for my offspring. What would go in the blank? I found the world with
Protest.
protests. Yeah,
drinkable-
great.
drinkable
Um,
water.
So you found the world with protests, and just as my ancestors protested and changed the world for me, so I protest so the world will be better for my offspring. Is that kind of what you were thinking, Amanda?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so much. With
Yeah.
fossil fuels, with sicknesses, with all
Yeah.
kinds of things we need to mend.
Right. Right. What else? I feel like I hear chickens.
No,
Yeah.
that's my bird.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
that's okay.
He's in the living room and I'm in the dining room.
I was like, what is that? I think the bird is saying, just as I found bird seed in this world. Okay, so here we go. So what other things would you apply this verse to today? Like to this particular Talmudic quote. So I love protest. That's amazing. So just as I found blank in the world, ... Somebody else.
Well,
Ignorant.
saving the environment would be one big one.
Yeah.
That's what it's
Beautiful.
all about, really.
Yes, it is. So this is a favorite text of environmentalists for sure. I found the world with clean air, and just as my ancestors found things with clean air, so I take action to give clean air to my kids. Great. Anything else? What else do you want to pass on that someone gave to you who lived in the past?
Sickness due to ignorance.
I'm sorry, Kevin?
Sickness due to ignorance.
Oh, okay. So knowledge that prevents you from like understanding and knowledge.
Yes, of
Yeah.
many.
Great. Great.
Yeah.
her son.
He's the one that His father's the one that introduced us to Sammy.
I can't hear whoever's talking.
This boy,
His
Oh.
father.
Okay.
his father, and that's the one I went to, his wife,
His wife. For what?
for psychiatric treatment.
No.
Okay. So here we go. So let me see if I can fix that
Roberts.
here.
I have one.
Oh, please go ahead.
I was thinking that just as I helped immigrants, just
Her name was Roberts.
as I found the world with, I'm just thinking in the past, the Jewish people have helped the immigrants come in, Jewish ones, and so I want to help those to come in.
Beautiful. I'm actually just going to set it so you're all muted, and if you're talking, please unmute yourself. That's beautiful. That's great. So you can see how this particular part of the story is very appealing, right? We have someone who, if you're just reading the story like simply, right? Like it doesn't really matter that it doesn't super make sense that Choni is the person not understanding things, but there we go. It's a nice little story. It's a nice little thing that could be taught by itself, right? Oh, one way of looking at it is that you don't think about the future and you only think about yourself. And the other is a broader concept of thinking about who benefits from your actions. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that you did this story about the stones. Yes, those of you who are in class the last time, you did a story about how a narrow view of thinking about what's your property and what do you need to take care of and who benefits versus an expanded view that might not be as intuitive, but that takes sort of a broader or different view that helps you to act ethically in a different kind of way. Okay, so very nice so far. Thanks.
Question?
Yes, please.
This section, I guess it kind of is reminding me of the previous section. And
Yeah.
what another thing that seemed weird to me about it, which was that he was assuming the people returning, like it was people dreaming for the whole 70 years.
Yes.
Instead of like different people going back. And this is like, it seems like this is picking up on that.
Oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that before, but I see what you're saying. I guess that's another way he's taking it like overly literally, right? Because it's Beshuv Adonai, when God returned all those people. So I think you're right that he thinks that they're the same people, right? They left and now they're returning. And so therefore those people must have slept the 70 years, almost none of which makes exact sense. Okay, now I'm almost looking at you. Right, so it's like this real hyper literal way of looking at it. Absolutely. All right, so let's keep going here. If I can manage it. Good. Okay, so then we have the magic Rip Van Winkle piece where, what just happened? Oh no, hold on. Okay, here we are. Here's the magic Rip Van Winkle. So in Act 1, Choni doesn't understand the verse. Act 2, he sees this Carib guy and he understands from him that you might not do things just for, the 70 years thing might have a different kind of meaning, maybe. But he's still stumped. And so he sits down to eat and, okay, I'm gonna stop that. He sits down to eat and then he falls asleep and he falls fast asleep and wakes up 70 years later, roughly. Or exactly, probably is what it means. So when he awoke, he saw a man gathering carobs from the carob tree. He said to him, "Do you know who planted the carob tree?" He said to him, "My father's father." Okay, still really sweet, right? Okay, and then here's the end of that first piece. He said to himself, aha, certainly 70 years passed in a dream. So what do you guys make of that? Any thoughts? What does he mean when he says, surely 70 years passed in a dream?
Again, the disconnect or the reality that they were living, it
Mhm.
wasn't theirs. It wasn't their reality, but they had to be there. It's like when you go to a foreign country and you have to adapt.
Okay, great. Anyone else want to chime in here? What does Coney mean when he goes to sleep, he wakes up, the grandkid, he sort of has like a fast forward moment, right? Well, really long moment, according to the story, right? He sees the guy planting, and then he goes to sleep, and when he wakes up, ta-da, he just happens to have a fully functioning carob tree with fruit and a grandson who says, oh yeah, my grandpa planted this for me.
Well, the only way that he can think that's possible if it was a dream.
Yep. Yeah, he's like, oh, like maybe that's what the verse means. That part I don't really get, honestly. Like maybe some of you get it better than I do, because it doesn't seem to really help him to explain how the people going back to Zion are like dreamers. Does anyone like have something to offer me there? Because I don't really see it. It feels to me like the story has shifted to something else.
Could it be that it has nothing to do with the story of that verse right now? I don't know what's going to happen on the next one. But
Yeah.
just,
Well, let's read the rest of it again and see if we can break it down. So this here is like the hinge in the story. This is the middle, I would say. Before it is about the carob tree and the Rip Van Winkle bit and the environmental piece, right? Like the idea of who do you act ethically for? Why might you do something that wouldn't be necessarily in your own interest? And how do you appreciate something that's passed down to you? And that's certainly a core question for us, right? Like what kind of Judaism or Jewish self or spiritual self or ethical knowledge, what did our parents and grandparents and those who came before us bequeath to us such that we want to pass that down to another generation? So that's sort of a core question that seems to be driving this piece of the story. Oh, well, yeah, I mean, there's a little, so Joan says, it's strange that he didn't identify himself to his grandson. It's all a little weird because it's not, I mean, maybe I'm reading this wrong, but back when he sees the person planting the carob tree, like, I'm not quite sure. Maybe let's read the rest and we'll see, but it's not quite clear to me that, like, a certain man was planting a carob tree reads like a random guy, right? That's Talmud for a random guy. And then when he comes back, okay, I think I have an answer for you. So here, when he comes back, he says, if you only read this part of the story and like say that's the end, then it makes sense, right? He sees the guy, it was a random guy, he goes to sleep, he sees the grandson, and he learns sort of the lesson of the story. Now, to me, and I'd have to go back to the scholarly piece to see if this is right, but I suspect it is. It looks to me like this next part of the story might sort of be mushed onto the first part of the story. Like in one part of the story, like in one version of the story, he falls asleep and gets the thing with the carob tree. And in the second version of the story, he goes to sleep and then he has this issue with no one recognizing him. But the two don't exactly make sense together. What do you guys think as a theory?
It seems like it could be playing with this possibility of the sort of literal and the metaphorical.
Yeah.
Because in the first instance, like he just sees someone planting a tree and like we can say, okay, we have this literal example of he actually slept for 70 years and sees the grandson. Or it could even be just a different way of looking at the same thing.
Right.
Of just thinking about kind of how we see the collapsing of time. Like the one person was talking about planning for his children, and the other person was talking about receiving from his ancestors.
Right.
And only by kind of entering into that does he kind of understand how this sense of a dream can be literal, but also being brought into a different way of seeing and thinking about what's there, a different perspective.
I love what you said about time collapsing and having a different perspective on things, because I think one of the themes in Judaism in general is this idea of continuity between, if you think about the Sheva Brachot, this idea that at transitional moments you can enter this space that is a time out of time. So you say, here's your couple under the chuppah, and in the blessings they go all the way from Adam and Eve through time, from every couple that ever got married, all the way to the joys of brides and bridegrooms shouting in joy in the days of the Messiah. So it's like this of time that's like all packed under the chuppah, and when you break the glass, you're back into historical time. This is how my teacher, Neil Gilman, explained it to me, and I love it, right? Because there are certain times when you just feel so connected to something that's not right there, and Judaism helps you to do that, right? You're connected to something that is out of time, but at the same time it's also this historical time, so it's very confusing. But it offers us this sense of connection. So I mean, I'll share something sort of weird with you, but when I was davening, either on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, I don't remember which, I was standing up there and I was singing, and I just had this very odd sense, and this doesn't happen to me like ever, but I had this very odd sense that my grandfather, my Zaidi, was with me. And he's the person that I really feel like I sort of inherited my religious sensibility from. That's a whole nother class. But I just had this sense that something that was out of this time, that I was connected to something bigger than myself, and something that didn't belong in this historical time. And it was a really like wonderful feeling. So I think religion and this also, it's like kind of like that too. It's like a little, ooh, like I can connect across the generations in a way that's very surreal, but not bad surreal necessarily yet. Okay, let's get to the second half though. So isn't that funny how like as we talk and we bounce ideas off of each other, like I hadn't connected that feeling and that experience that I had about how I received from my grandfather and how I pass it to my kids, or how I experience that today. I hadn't connected that to this story until you said the thing about time collapsing. And that was really, it's through learning together. Hold on. That's odd. It's through learning together that we can generate all of this beautiful mess of stuff that opens up the world to us in a different way. And that actually, Rubenstein says in his introduction to this book, that there's a tension between like the halachic expertise of the elites or the rabbis in the rabbinic world, and then how to connect that to like the everyday lived life of like the whole, how does that impact everyone? How can this be accessible? And stories were a really important way that the Talmud communicates and our tradition communicates values, ethics, all of those things to everyone in a way that we can digest. So more on that, but we have to do the sad part now. Okay.
Well, I had a thought about how this appeared to me, and that was had more to do with the non-believing, and that has to do with when the Jews were in exile in Babylon, they were dreaming of Zion.
Yeah.
And when they came back, I'm sure they didn't recognize it from their dream.
Oh, I love it, Don.
And then they had to recreate it.
Yeah. Ooh, I like that.
So
this
this,
does not take that sunny view, but you have taught me something lovely that I'm going to use next time, right? Like when we return from a dream, it's not exactly what we imagine. And part of it is, right, there are carobs on the carob tree, but the rest of it is not recognizable. And in fact, it also, like another person who taught me a similar lesson was, there was a wonderful student of mine at AHA who was from Germany. And I asked the kids sort of the same sort of questions I'm asking you, which is, you know, like, how do you connect to the story, et cetera, et cetera. She said, well, I really understand what Honi was feeling at the end of the story, because I'm afraid that after spending all this time here in Greensboro, when I return to Germany, it won't look the same and people won't really know who I am and things will have changed. And I was like, like, it was amazing. It was amazing. So let's read the sad part, because we're being very sunny here. Okay, so in the second, if it hinges on this particular line, we have the carob stuff, and then we have the 70 years past in a dream stuff, and now we're gonna have sort of the second act of this drama. So Honi goes to his house. He says, does the son of Honi the circle drawer live here? And they said to him, no, he's not alive anymore, but his grandchild is. Oh, so, Joan, is this where you were talking about it was odd? It was odd that he didn't identify himself here or anywhere in the second half? You can just nod, you're muted. Okay. Okay. So he's no more, but his grandson lives. He says, but I'm Honi. So he does try to identify himself. And they're like, okay, dude, no, that's not possible. He died. We haven't seen him for 70 years. So he tries. And then he goes to the study house and he overhears, they haven't forgotten him. They are quoting his teachings. Okay, they're quoting his teachings, so they do remember him, right? They're talking nicely about him. They say, he went to the study house, he heard the sages saying, our traditions are as clear today as in the years of Honi, the circle drawer. So what does that say about what Honi planted really well in his lifetime?
What do they, so what do they, I mean, when they say circle drawer, is that like the Kabbalah?
No, and you might have come on to the call after this, but we talked about how there's another story where he is a very powerful advocate for rain, where he got his nickname, Honi the circle drawer.
Okay.
So again, I mean, I think the sages are saying we have our traditions so clear because we have this great teacher and he said them so clearly and he transmitted them so clearly. So his teachings in this case are kind of like what he planted, but, and there's certainly a lot we can draw here. His teachings, his carobs, his fruit, they survive and they survive in his name. However, when he went in, he said, oh, right, they said I did this paragraphing wrong, I think. For when he entered the study house, he solved every difficulty of the sages. So the difficulties are like the questions that the sages would have about what the Mishnah meant and how to understand Torah, right? They would raise all these questions and he could answer every single one, and he helped us to understand the Torah much better. So yay to our ancient teacher of blessed memory, Honi the circle drawer. And he walks in and he says, oh, it's me. Hi guys, like it's me, I'm back. And they're like, no, that's crazy, like go away. So they didn't treat him with proper amounts of honor, at which point he prayed for mercy and his soul departed. So essentially he goes to his house, they don't recognize him. He goes to the study hall where he was a great man and they didn't recognize him. And he said, I don't want to do this anymore. I'd like to die, God. And so he died. I warned you, dark. So why do you think he prayed to die at that particular moment?
Well, perhaps he came to realize that it wasn't, or maybe the lesson is that our presence is not needed for the gifts that we've invested in
Mm-hmm.
to bear fruit. His presence wasn't needed. His legacy carried on
Mm-hmm.
regardless.
Right. So how did he feel about that? And anyone can chime in.
He wasn't needed anymore. His works carried on. And he
Right.
wasn't needed.
He had no connection to the future, I guess.
He what?
He had no connection with the people in the future.
Ah.
And his teachings.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I'm a little troubled by the fragment that says, and they did not treat him with the honor that he deserved.
Say more. Why are you troubled?
Because what was his goal? I mean, the ultimate honor was that his memory, they remembered him with such respect.
Right.
Well, and there's a conundrum. If they remembered him with such respect, then why did they not treat him with respect when he was present?
Right. Is this ringing any contemporary bells for people?
Was did they think he was an imposter?
Yeah, they did not believe that he was who
Right.
he was.
And that's why he just faded into the sunset.
Yeah, I mean, so I just wonder here, actually, I love that. Thank you for turning our attention to this phrase, because I asked you, why did he pray for mercy? Why did he pray to die? And there are two options here, right? One is that they didn't believe him. And two is that they did not treat him with honor. And maybe those are so bound up that they're not, you can't extricate them from one another. Because you have to understand that back then, if you were a sage, right? And you were like the top sage, you got a lot of honor. Like you sat at the front of the room and everyone had to stand for you, and like really like on steroids, right? That top sage got a lot of honor and he deserved that. But they didn't recognize him as one thing. And then they didn't treat him that way. So I mean, you could read the story a few ways. One is, I'm just imagining like bibliodrama or Talmudodrama, right? So you're choni. You've just gone to your own house and been told your family doesn't recognize you, even when you say who you are. So you're already feeling like something really bad. And then you go to this other place, right? There are two types of legacies. There's the house and the family, and then there's what the Torah teachings. And he sees that when he hears our traditions are as clear as today as in the days of Honi the circle drawer, he was just like the greatest solver of all of these problems. I imagine him feeling like this swell of happiness, like, oh my God, my stuff lasted. And they revere me and my teachings. And then he says, I'm home. Guys, it's me. I taught you that. And they're like, no, sorry, I mean, you're not this great guy. That he was before, and we love his stuff, but you should go away. You should go get some serious help because you're claiming to be Santa Claus, you know. Um, and so I don't know if it was the rejection or if it's the fact that he didn't get to retake his place in that world. Like, that's how I read, they didn't treat him with honor. They didn't recognize him, and therefore they didn't give him, if they had recognized him, they surely would have treated him like they always treated him. I mean, one contemporary bell that's ringing for me is, how do we teach, how do we treat seniors who have taught us so much, and we feel lovingly towards them and we quote them, but if they're still here, sometimes our actions don't connect those two things. So that's one thing I'm thinking of. And I've known people to say, I have so much to give, and yet, like someone once said to me, I have so much to give, yet when I go to try to volunteer in my field, I get treated like they're doing me a favor, right? And so this story, I mean, God forbid that that person prays to die, but it does sort of feel that way to me, like, right? Like, oh, we've learned so much from you, and we don't even recognize you, the person standing before us, as this incredible resource and contributor. Okay, but in their defense, he was wrapped up in an earth blanket for 70 years and asleep. So it's not quite as direct as that. So he prays for mercy, and he dies.
Yeah.
And so then at the end, we have this different text frame. So remember, at the beginning, we had this business about Shir Hamalot. And at the end, we have Rava, who is an Amora, a later rabbi, and he says, this is what it means when people say, quote, either fellowship or death. So what do we make of that? Either fellowship or death. And what does that have to do with Choni?
Without connections to other beings,
Yeah.
we don't survive without positive connections to other beings.
Yeah. Oh, I see questions here. So Sharon, you said he prayed for mercy. It doesn't mean forgiveness. It means I want to die. Like, be merciful to me because I'm so miserable or sick or whatever it is. Like, you pray for mercy is rabbinic language for praying for death. And then Rebecca says, people need people. Yeah. So why should it be? So, right. So this idea that fellowship, if you don't have some sort of relationships, and this connects to what Don said earlier, the idea of not having relationships is just fatal, right? That it's very hard for him to have had wonderful relationships, to come back into the world and then to not have those. Yeah.
It seems like it could, I mean,
Amanda?
it seems like in the previous section, it could actually be like part of his legacy is actually what's coming back to haunt him. Because when people say like our traditions are totally clear, he solved every difficulty. It's like he created the system that was perfect and closed, and there was no room for something as weird as someone who'd been gone for 70 years, skipping time and coming back.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what's catching up with him at the end.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So he helped to create this system, and also it's totally surreal, right? Yeah. Was someone trying to comment before? Marcia, was that you? I couldn't tell.
I had to mute myself because my sidekick in the other room was making too much noise. Yeah, I mean, if you don't have fellowship and then he dies, it's like a form of depression because like everybody was saying, people need people.
Right.
And, we're just all anxious. We want to hug one another. We want to be able to
Yes.
feel one another in our hearts. And
Yeah.
if you don't have that, you get depressed and you die.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yocheved.
Yeah, they have LinkedIn. There's a town in Greece where they studied longevity, and
Yeah.
that's the town in the world that has most people living longer, like over 100.
Yeah.
And what they do is that everybody knows everybody, and everybody gathers outside, and they have dances. So there's that of course extends your life. That's like part of the longevity study, is to engage with others. That elongates your life.
Right. I think of, I forget who he was who wrote Bowling Alone, the study about the decreasing amount of number of social connections that people, I feel like, no, Amanda, I feel like it was someone else, but someone who has a hand to Google could surely figure this out. And I think there's even in England, they have someone called like the Minister of Loneliness, something that is meant to deal with problems related to loneliness. And yeah, go ahead.
It also makes me think about our faith tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Judaism is a communal
Right.
tradition. And without that, it requires our practice, our observances in general do not require going away to a monastery or something. We're supposed to practice together,
Yeah.
not individually.
And that's particularly difficult now. And I love what the Jewish part, like I don't have any desire to be a Jew that is not connected with community. For me, it's about like, Josh and I always used to say, like, we want to live in a community and to build communities that feel like Cheers, right? Not the alcohol part, but the idea that everyone knows your name. And if you don't, like if Norm doesn't show up to Cheers for a few days, someone's going to say, where's Norm? Right? Go check on Norm. And that's the kind of community that I always know I need, and that he and I are always drawn to and seeking to make stronger in that particular way. Because now that we're sort of talking about it, there's two pieces, right? There's like this beautiful learning, right? There's the Torah piece, but if it's not matched with the relationship piece, it doesn't really work. Like Torah in a vacuum doesn't work. Like you could see, like you could have imagined an alternate end to this story where he says, okay, I get it. I was away for a long time, but I'm so happy. I see my offspring is flourishing. They have plenty of carobs. And I see that in the study hall, like I'm not forgotten. I'm there and my Torah lives on after me. I'm going to go to Club Med and hang out. Or I don't know what he would have said, because there's that piece that doesn't really make sense. Like, even if you see those things are happening, what do you do next? Yeah, there's more for those who have watched The Good Place, but I'm not going to say it because spoilers. So yeah, I mean, I think this can be troubling from the perspective of if you are feeling lonely and you read this story, you might feel, I don't know if you feel validated or if it sort of feeds into some, it makes you feel worse. I can only, I would think. But at least in terms of, and I think it's important not to read the story that way, right? Like if you're lonely, then you might as well just throw in the towel. Right? It's not saying that. What it's saying is relationships are vital for our health, right? And that's why we're doing this crazy virtual thing, and we can't just sit it out or wait it out for however long it's going to be without seeing one another and talking with one another and giving each other like pretend hugs. Like we want to feel that. It's really hard. Yeah, So I would read it that way. It's not that a lonely life is not worth living. It's that what you read is we really need to be in relationship. We need to be known, right? These are essential human truths. We need to be known. We need to be recognized for what we can give. And sort of as Amanda, you were saying, we can't like be in the past tense, right? Like past tense and present tense don't mix well. And so that's why this is a super weird story. So when kids in Hebrew school read this story, they generally only read the part that ends there, right? And actually a lot of our stories, you'll read a story in the coming weeks with my husband where the front end, I don't know if you're going to read this one, but there's another story where the front end is quoted everywhere as like this wonderful, like that line about, so have you planted for blah, blah, blah. This one is like, God is super happy that the rabbis have figured out how to do halakha without God, like without getting divine intervention. And so God laughs and says, my children have defeated me. Isn't this wonderful? Like they can go to college now. Not that that's an issue. And anyone who wants to give me free counseling, feel free. But the second half is about how they treat someone, how they treat a rabbi who was in that community of people making the halakha who was an outlier. And so even though in the first half of the story, the rabbinic process makes something productive and beautiful, in the second half, kind of parallel to this one, but much worse, because it's about people bullying each other. It's also about how they're treating people, and it's not nice. So it's nice to have laws, but again, it's nice to be people making laws and who are sages, but again, if you are not treating people nicely, what does it matter? And it also, I don't know if you guys have read Milton Steinberg's book, A Driven Leaf, and it's about someone from the rabbinic era that sort of gets drawn into the world of Greek philosophy and is very attracted to it. It's not messy like all this stuff, right? There's not like clear moral in this. Like you can't just look up like different categories of like philosophical thought and like find them in a Jewish text, right? You have to like dig and delve and do what we're doing and talk about it to really get into the heart of the story. It's not a fable, right? In that way, like this happened and therefore we learn X. So he's very drawn to the elegance of the Greek philosophy, but then like in his life, he sees how people who was the rulers who admire that philosophy, that they are also brutal and not treating people correctly. So he sort of says, okay, like that can't be for me anymore. If what the wisdom literature is saying is not implemented in relationship to people, then it becomes dead and meaningless. The Torah itself sort of dries up like a dead carob tree. God forbid. Poo, poo, poo.
I have a question for you.
Yes, please.
When I read this, I was thinking, why would he be upset? I would think he would be exalted, thrilled to know that his works have passed on, and he can just listen and see where, I think there was another story, was it Rabbi Akiva or something, where he goes and notes how it was, and I would think he would be uplifted instead of down to know that his works have passed on beyond him.
Yeah. Amanda, you were kind of speaking to that point, right? Like Sharon, what it brings up for me is the idea that, yes, like it's sort of this fantasy, or it would be if you weren't alive, that you could come back and see what life has brought and whether or not what you did made a difference.
Like a wonderful life.
That's right. That's right. That's why I feel like you could almost in a better, in a story where he wasn't still alive, but he came back as a ghost and saw all of these things, it would be like a really happy story.
Yeah.
But that's obviously not what the editors of this half of the story were trying to drive home, but yeah, absolutely. So if you just cut the story off here and like do a little editing up above, like it's this beautiful story, but no, like we're not, A, that doesn't happen, and B, if you're doing that while you're alive, I mean, you would think it would be a blessing to know, right? Like,
Yep.
But he's coming back as a stranger. Like Don pointed out at the beginning, he's coming back into a world that he thinks he knows, but he really doesn't. So all kinds of links and relationships are broken both ways. It's not that he's lived there for 70 years and then they forgot him and don't recognize him. It's that he's coming back like as though a dreamer, really. Right? This feels like it does feel like a dream. Yeah. All right. Well, guys, this was awesome. Thank you so much for studying this story with me.
Thank you. Yasher Koach.
Thank you.
To you too. Yasher Koach, have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.